Hi everyone, I'm Sandy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have my September reading wrap up for you. And September was a absolutely great reading month. I was on vacation for a couple of weeks in September with a couple of long flights and a couple of long train rides. So needless to say, I read a lot and I just had so much fun reading some of these books. I had some great buddy reads. I had some great nonfiction that I'm going to go through. I can't wait to talk about all the books. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into all the books that I ended up reading in September. So when I look at what was on my TBR for the 1001 book list, I had Kristin Lavransdatter, which I did finish, and I have a video about that, my last countdown video. I also read The Dispossessed, which was my 1001 book club pick. It's in the same video as the Kristin Lavransdatter is. And I read Home by Marilyn Robinson. All three of those are in the same video, so you can go and check them out. Before that, before I had left, I had read Blindness by Henry Green, so I finished that one off of the 1001 book countdown off of my TBR. The one book I did not finish from the 1001 book list that was on my TBR was The Circle by Dave Eggers. You can see there is a bookmark in here. I'm now on page 50. Yay! So I am working on it, but it's slow going. I've been reading a few other things at the same time. I wanted to finish another book, and I just haven't been working my way back to this quite yet. But this is the one book off of the 1001 book countdown that I just did not get to, sadly. All right. The other books that were on my TBR, the first one is one I haven't talked about yet, which is My Life in France by Julia Child. Oh my goodness. So I started reading this while I was in France, and it was absolutely delightful. I really enjoyed learning more about Julia Child's experience in France with her husband and how much she just loved food. I haven't really watched her TV show. I've watched, Julie and Julia, a couple other things, but she just absolutely loved food. And her husband were very free spirits. You can see them on the cover with hearts. They would send out Valentine's Day cards that were really fun loving. But I enjoyed reading this because a lot of what I experienced in France, she talked about in the book, just the people and the food. The food. Yeah, absolutely amazing. I really loved when she was talking about her time in Marseille. There's a particular point in this book where she was talking about the wind in Marseille and how one day it was there and the next day it was gone. We experienced that exact same thing in Marseille. It's just one day, for 2 days, it was just this horribly strong, destructive wind, and it was just gone. The next day. So that I found really interesting as well. I liked how she went through all the trouble she had with publishing her book. It was really interesting when you think about this in the movie Julia and Julia. A lot of the same people are there, but the timelines are slightly different, especially like her sister. And in the movie, she just shows up and kind of meets her husband right away. And in the book, her sister actually stays with her for a period of time well before that. And so I thought those were really interesting details, but it's such a fun read, such an easy read. I really want some more French food. I miss being in France for sure. But this one I would definitely recommend a read if you are interested in Julia Child at all. Someone had asked me if I went to any of the restaurants she went to, and the answer to that is no. I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't even think about doing that, actually. I wish I would have, but this is an absolutely delightful book and such a fun read. It was my nonfiction pick for whatever month that was, September. So yeah, Julia Child. The next book that was on my TBR, which was A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I did want to read this while in France, and I just didn't get to it. It's the second time it's been on my TBR, and I just haven't gotten to it. I feel a little bad. I do want to read this. It just didn't appeal to me for whatever reason. It was much easier to bring my e-reader than physical books. And so, yeah, it sat there in my bag all over France. Never got opened. So that's another one I didn't quite make it to in September. All right. The next book that was on my TBR that I did finish was The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. I did this as a buddy read with Nikki from Red Dot Reads, AJ Dunn from AJ Dunn Reads and Writes, and Angela, who's a friend and a subscriber. This book won the Women's Prize this year, and I really enjoyed this book quite a bit. It has several characters, but the main ones are Benny and his mom Annabelle, and they have went through a tragic loss right at the very beginning, I think in the first chapter, and the whole book is really them dealing with that in a wide variety of different ways. It manifests itself in one way with Annabelle, another way with Benny, and their interactions with each other and with the people around them are somewhat unique. And there's a big twist in this book that I won't talk about because it's really fun when you find it out yourself. But it was something I had never seen before or read before in a novel. And so I thought that was truly brilliant. I really enjoyed the storyline. It was, I think the group in general thought it might be a tad bit too long, about 100 pages or so too long. And am I happy with the ending? I'm okay with the ending, but I wasn't like, wow, that's the best ending ever. So this was my first Ruth Ozeki book. I would definitely read more by this author. I don't know if I would read one right now. I would recommend this one for the twist alone is really, really fascinating and pulled me into the story. I thought that was brilliant and brilliantly done in this book. So no spoilers, but I would recommend it, and it did win the Women's Prize this year for a good reason. Yeah, it was a really fun read. Fun's not the right word. It was a really interesting read, but it was, largely about grief. So yeah, The Book of Form and Emptiness. All right. The next book that was on my TBR that I did finish is Children of Time by Adrian Tchikovsky. I read this with Dia from Novel Idea. We read this in just a few days at the very beginning of September before I left on vacation. And this was my first space opera. I've never read anything quite like this before. I had a wonderful time reading this with Dia. She's a lovely buddy reader partner to read a book with. And this book really... a part of this is it's told in two different kind of perspectives. One is told from the creatures that are on the planet, and one is told from humans that are trying to get to the planet. And there's an AI kind of component of it as well in here. The parts that I struggle with is it got a bit repetitive, and I did like the component where the creatures are spiders. I like the components with the spiders more than I like them with the humans. And I thought how they worked their network, how they communicated with each other was really a great component of this. The whole idea was that the planet that they were going to was supposed to be inhabited by monkeys. Something went wrong, and instead it was inhabited by spiders. And Earth is, of course, devastated, and they're trying to find a new place to actually live. They're on this long journey where they're in hypersleep. Yeah. But the repetitive part came in because there was like these conflicts that kept coming up over and over and over again. It's like, okay, I got it the first time. I didn't need it again and again and again. Again, a very chunky book, could have been considerably shorter. I don't know if I'll go on to read any by Adrian Tchikovsky or not. This book was actually in my very first book haul ever on my channel. So I'm thrilled that I read it, that I'm done with it. Am I in love with sci-fi? I don't know yet. I mean, I also read The Dispossessed, which wasn't hugely successful for me, but I'm willing to give it another try. I would put this kind of in the 3.5 star range for me. Was it a good entry into sci-fi? Yeah, it wasn't bad. It just was, a little long for sure. All right. And then the next book is also a sci-fi book, and I read this one with Fraser Simon from Springboard Thought and Gemma from Gemma Books, and we read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, another sci-fi. I don't know how I ended up with so much sci-fi in September. I really enjoyed this book quite a bit. It was a nice, fun, light-ish read with a found family aspect of this crew that are going on the Wayfarer. And I loved learning about these characters. I think I said in our group chat that we had, it's like I'm getting to know new friends and loving just learning about them. And all of the different things, they are traveling, and they're doing what's called hole punching in space, which basically opens doorways, and you're just traveling along with them through the good times and the bad times, learning all about them, learning their different relationships. And it was so much fun. I have picked up the second book, and we're going to be reading the second book in November. So I'm thrilled. This is a sci-fi, for whatever reason, that was lighter, easier for me to consume. Loved reading it. Absolutely would pick up more in the series. Can't wait to read more Becky Chambers. I think maybe where I'm at in my sci-fi level reading, this is, probably right about the grade that I'm at right now. And things that are more complicated sometimes just I maybe don't enjoy. But The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And then the last book that was on my TBR that I read with Jack over at Spread Book Joy, I did not finish in September. I finished it over the weekend, the first couple of days in October, and that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I am going to do a full video about this book because I have so much to say about it. So look for that coming soon. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Really loved this book quite a bit. And then I had three books. Oh my gosh. 3 books that were not on my TBR at all. One was Desperation and Death by J.D. Robb. It was the next in the In Death series. It came out on September 6th. I read it while I was gone. The one thing with this one is I love these characters in the series. This is like the 56th book in the series. I love the series so much. This one did feel a little bit repetitive. The theme of it was really close to another one that was done not too long ago. So while I still loved it, I'm worried that the series now, is it going to feel repetitive from this point forward? I'm not sure. I'm hopeful that it's not, but we'll see. I'm not sure when the next book is coming out. So that was the first book that wasn't on my TBR that I did finish. The other book was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This is the first book in the Neapolitan series, and we read this as part of the Up to No Good Book Club, which has Jolene at Bookworm Adventure Girl, Shelley Swearingen, Angela, Deb, and Sonia in it. And I have had a, inconsistent relationship with Elena Ferrante. My first book, Troubling Love, did not like. This one was much more successful. I do think the characters are unique. I do think the writing is really good. I liked just getting to know the main characters. It being the first part of 4 books, it did end at a point where you're like, okay, I need to find out what's going on with the next book. Book 4 in the series is on the 1001 book countdown. So I need to read the other 2 so that I can read the 4th one. This is not a series where it feels like you could pick up the 4th book and just read it. I feel like you have to have that backstory. This book is all about, I think it goes from, if I remember correctly, adolescence and, what is it? Childhood and adolescence are the 2 parts that are in this particular one. So yeah, the next ones will continue on, I'm sure, with farther on in their life. But this was the first book that I read as part of the Up to No Good Book Club. And then the last one was Motherless Brooklyn by Jonathan Lethem. So this was also with the Up to No Good Book Club. I ended up reading this over the last week of September. And this book ended up being one that I loved the characters, and it is kind of a detective novel. Feels like it's written in a film noir kind of way, yet it's set in the 80s, and so it's a little bit kind of jarring when there's a reference to a artist or a musician, and it's like that isn't quite aligning with how I'm reading this book. So it is a detective story. You have someone who dies right at the beginning, and these characters that are trying to figure out who killed him. And the one thing is this, it has some representation of a character who has Tourette's. And it was that character that I loved. How he presented as Tourette's, it really makes me wonder what kind of research the author did about that particular syndrome, because because it wasn't necessarily the stereotypical verbal kind of outburst in the book. It was a lot more than that. And so that character made this book, in my opinion. He was so well done and so likable, even for having that. I mean, I was just rooting for him the whole time. But around the 3/4 mark, it got into more of like heavy duty detective kind of part, as well as this other component that just seemed like it didn't fit the story very well. So for that part, it lost me a little bit. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was brilliant. Apparently there's also a movie, and that movie stars Edward Norton as the character who has Tourette's, which I think is really interesting. But in that one, the movie, it's actually set in 1950, and there's no reference to the 1980s. So I found that really interesting as well. I haven't actually watched the movie. That's all hearsay from others. I think it was from Frasier. So yeah, it was kind of a last minute read, mainly because I put it off until the end of the month. But yeah, it was a really good one. Like I said, I mean, Kristin Lavransdatter was a 5-star read. Home was excellent. I love The Long Way to Small Angry Planet. Lonesome Dove, I'll talk about coming up, but so good. So lots of amazing reads. I'm so thankful I had so much time to read this month. It was an absolute blast, and I'm very thankful I got to read My Life in France while in France. That was truly special. I had a really good time just reading some of that while I was actually there. But what did you end up reading in September? Have you read any of these books? What was your favorite book that you read in September? I'm really curious. But with that is my September reading wrap up. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, everyone, thanks. Bye.